am Esruversitan. To start with the urban legend lore breakdown. It involved a bunch of abnormalities and the start of the Zwei Association. Let us continue with this. After Roland and Nezhak off Angela by drinking ridiculous amounts of alcohol, Isadora, back in Zwei Association South Section 6, was talking with San and Julia about them being in the lineup for the search team for the library, with an understanding that those that were sent previously were not returning. The objective: retrieve the books of Mars and Lulu, although Julia added that they should collect as many books as possible, as they might contain useful information. San asked Isadora why she's doing that, as the Zwei Association specializes in peacekeeping and security, not full-on combat. Isadora then asked why San came begging to them for help in the first place, if he knew that. San considered it the only place he could count on. She asked about his younger brother, although this was quite a clearly sensitive subject. One that he didn't want to answer. He thanked them for the help, clearly appreciating this. Isadora then went on to talk about the distortion phenomenon, an urban nightmare. It started to appear in the city since the White Nights and Dark Days, as in when the Seed of Light was activated, for less time than it was intended to. Angela did talk about the collapsed EGO, creating beings not much better than abnormalities. Did she consider this? If she did, then she knew what she was doing, and she wanted nothing to get in the way of her own freedom. If she didn't, then even AI have their bad days, and I can see this biting her in the due to some unknown variables that she didn't anticipate. As for the first recorded case of the distortion phenomenon, that was a particularly bad one, known as the Pianist. It wiped out 80% of District 9's population. Probably one of the most public cases of mass murder for quite some time. And it's not the head's doing. It's the doing of a many-armed man with an organ that sounds worse than a cute-looking, tone-deaf pink demon with a black hole stomach near a karaoke machine. It was so severe that the Hana Association sent a color fixer to take it down. Yeah, and those are the elites of the fixers. You know it's bad when one of them is sent. Okay, we might know how the distortion phenomenon started, but the Zwei Association doesn't know that. Other than it involves L Corp's disappearance, the White Nights and Dark Days, and that the focal point was in its nest. They suspected that the library was tied to this as well. Well, they're not wrong about that. They just don't have all the information to make sure. After that, they mentioned reports, one of which involved a resident in an area under their protection distorting into a four-legged beast. Thankfully, it was taken care of before the death toll reached 2 digits. So it was less than 10. Yeah, that is something to be thankful for in that city. That distortions of the pianist power were rare. There was also a report of a restaurant clerk that turned into a man-eating sandwich monster. Yeah, they couldn't make that up. I mean, that's not a good way to go, is it? Being eaten by a giant living panini that has only one desire: turning any unfortunate individual it came across into its most recent filling. The Zwei Association are not going to keep their eye off the library anytime soon. And since there are other cases to deal with, higher grade fixes, they just won't be available. San thanks her for her info. Then Isidora went tsundere on him and said that she was just doing her job, not doing him a favor or anything. Although Julia was not so convinced by this. And to be honest, I don't think we are either. After watching this, Roland asked if it was true that there's a connection between L-Corp, the distortion phenomenon, and White Nights and Dark Days. He didn't even know where they were in that city. The White Nights and Dark Days incident was the kind that was rarer than the kind of autocrat that actually cared about those that they ruled over. He's heard of some cases of wings falling apart on their own. In some cases, that's what they wanted you to think, Roland. In at least one case, that was due to Garion's doing. Yeah, an arbiter of the head. As that's what she did. Regardless, this was mostly confined to the nest itself. L-Corp had an effect that was city-wide. It was as if it fell asleep, something that the head had no control over. And for once it wasn't paranoia. They had something to be truly concerned with. One of their arbiter's rare failures. Yeah, we all have our bad days. Even the precision instruments of a totalitarian state. Angela asked what it would change if the library really was related to White Nights and Dark Days. Roland replied, nothing. His work would continue. Hard to know who was acting more politician there. As in, who was the least convincing. Upon arrival, Julia compared the transportation that the invitation provided to a singularity, or more specifically, what one is capable of. Likely a reference to W-Corps. San was more focused on his surroundings, knowing what would happen next. The director of the library would greet them. At least the Zwei would be able to spread this information around, regardless of what happens to them. That Angela was the one who was in charge of the library. Speaking of which, Angela then appeared to greet them, although she recognized that it wasn't the first time that San had been there. San was straight to the point and just said why they were there to retrieve the books of Mars and Julia. Yeah, not one to waste time, is he? Angela confirmed that they were in there, and Julia asked to confirm that the terms on the invitation were understood. Either they'd get the books that they came there for, or they'd become books. Angela confirmed this. And then Julia noticed that she felt robotic. Angela paused briefly at this. She didn't like it. She then said her farewell and then left. All those that went in fell in battle, like the others. And as a result, they made the librarian stronger.
Yeah, even Lord Douchebag himself can wield it if he chooses. Availability permitting. Well, after that, Angela explained that the library was located at the source of the White Nights and Dark Days. She repurposed Elcor HQ for her own requirements. Although she didn't have anything to say about the distortion phenomenon that apparently started occurring afterwards. The truth is, you cut it off before it was complete, and you had nothing to say about that? All because he wanted petty vengeance over Ian. Yeah, I know he was the hottest steaming pile of up outside of the sewage works, but making everyone else suffer sounds like overkill to me, as most of them had nothing to do with it. Although the specifics... That's true. When she said that she had little or no information about it, as she was trapped inside and couldn't get that info that's outside. Although she did have an idea. Which surprised Roland. She then basically went over her past as the secretary of that was there to assist Ian, who was putting himself through the cycle of torment, along with the others in Lobotomy Corporation, as X, the manager of it, although she mentioned neither of them by name. Nor did she indicate that they were the same person. She was designed to pass for human in every way, including looks, emotions, and to do things based on them. Now, this also made her illegal, as far as the AI Ethics Amendment was concerned. She was forced to read the same scripts over and over again for what was 1,000,000 years from her perspective. All to make that single project succeed. She didn't say what that was, but we know that it was the seed of light that this was all about. Then the White Nights and Dark Days happened. And we know what happened next, don't we? Things got worse. And that's the shortest version that I can think of.
Yeah, that city had enough to deal with as it was. Psycho cannibals, organized crime, the odd monster attack, without adding distortions into that mix. It's a miracle that there's anything left of that city at all. Roland then mentioned what happened. People turning into monsters that killed indiscriminately. Then the first reported case of the distortion. He described that as a hellscape. Think about it. If he calls what the pianist caused a hellscape, then what was there normally was probably bearable by comparison. I mean, even in the back streets of District 23, it'd be considered bearable by comparison, and that's full of cannibals. District 9, until that point, was relatively safe. He thanked her for sharing that, even if it was sensitive. Angela was surprised that he was less shocked than she was expecting. He also added that the distortions made by what happened gave off a suspiciously similar vibe to the library and everyone in it. He also noticed that she's been through a lot, but didn't get distracted from what was needed, such as what to use as bait to lure more of the Zwei Association, along with any other groups of guests in that city. Well, funny you should say that, because Angela had a solution to that. Conveniently, she provided him with the Book of Distortion, an attempt to write down the relationship between L-Corp and the distortion phenomenon, with some details omitted, such as the seed of light being cut off before it was meant to. She even theorized that some would be not much better than abnormalities when she officially took over the facility. Anyone thinking that it's not a matter of if Roland figures it out, but when? As for how he'd react, hard to tell. But that will be revealed eventually, as there was still the mystery of how he got inside the library in the first place without an invitation. Something that shouldn't be possible, and something that Angela found uncomfortable, which was why that she couldn't just kill him, but she couldn't just let him go either. Next we have the Happy Teddy Bear. Now, you might think that stuffed toys aren't going to be dangerous, but don't let that fool you. Don't believe those movies that tell you otherwise. This toy is what would appear if Ted and Toy Story were horror movies. Either that or creepypasta. This toy was one with a 7-year-old girl. It missed her hugs. Unfortunately, the girl grew up and it was abandoned. It never forgot that girl. This resulted in a fear of abandonment, so it hugged any that got close enough to it so tightly that they'd either choke them to death or crush them to death. In the facility, this happened every time an employee was sent to work on it, twice in a row. In the library, however, it's different. It comes to the librarians and is not content to wait for them. Towards Malkuth and any with her. It'll want them to play with it, out of loneliness, wanting to draw them close to it, not desiring violence, due to how damaged it was to begin with. When showing displays of affection, it will happily play with those that it can. When delivering a nostalgic embrace of the old days, it only wants to bring the love to whoever it's focused on. Yeah, it's unaware that it's killing those it's hugging, so it's not like Chucky from the Child's Play series. Malkuth found it refreshing to see it again, even feeling a little sorry for what she had to do to take it down. A feeling that her librarians didn't share, due to the people killed by it. The Happy Teddy Bear stage is a children's room that's seen better days. Missing pieces of walls, so I can imagine what the rest of the house is like. The floor had jigsaw puzzle pieces. I've seen those around in some places in reality. A place that was as abandoned as it was. A reminder of why it's there in the first place. Angela, that's just cruel. Not that surprising. I mean, the least you could have done is given us a less Cecil at home. After defeating this abnormality, the flaw of history would add its power to their own. And considering one of the abnormality pages, that could be useful in certain circumstances. It depends on how you use it. Anyway, Roland delivered some more books after Malkuth was done with her second abnormality. Roland understood that she considered that her third life. And then he asked her if the library was related to the Bosmy Corporation. He heard that from Angela. Malkuth then told him that she was the AI in charge of the control team in the Bosmy Corporation, but not like Angela. She was more like the Brotherhood of Iron, a brain in a robot's body, or the Defiled, as some would put it. Upon hearing that, Roland was worried that the library violated the AI Ethics Amendment even more than once, fearing the head wanting to burn that place to the ground, if it found out. You're not wrong there, Roland, but they've destroyed companies for less than that. They almost did that to the Bosmy Corporation for the Cogito experiments. They would have sent more than that. Well, what they did if they found out that Aeon had built Angela. An institution that manages a city is how Malkuth would put the head. An authoritarian dictatorship that rules through fear, more like. Although I can understand their anti-AI law. Not much is known about them, however, but enough is known to not provoke them, as those that try to find out more about the head than they'd like, they aren't usually allowed to live long enough to tell others. They're also disturbingly quick when they need to be, when they need to expend effort. Well, it's hard to hire assassins if you don't know who to kill. Malkuth remarks on how casual Roland was with such a serious conversation. And that should hint that there's more to him than it initially appears. Roland apologized to her if it seemed that he was ignoring her. His priorities were unusual. Apparently, his unique personality is part of his survival strategy. Well, considering what he's talking about, he knows more than he's saying. Malkuth confirmed that she used to be in charge of the control team, while in the present she's in charge of the floor of history. She traced back her own history, and then she asked if he wanted to listen to it. He didn't want to hear her long and convoluted story. Roland, stop being a and listen to her. Actually, that's what Malkuth's tone could be summed up with. That mood killer. He asked why bother if she was going to tell him anyway. Well, you have a good point there, Roland, but you could have put it better than that. Her second life as the head of the control team was what she was ordered to do, bearing all the flaws from her previous life, although her memory was fragmented when she was first woken up. She still had the unresolved pain and regret from her past. The daily deaths that occurred in the Botany Corporation were just work to her. She had a vague feeling of something going wrong, because she didn't try... she didn't try hard enough. Her efforts was that of one that was meant well, at least to herself, but she was forcing others to follow her own selfish standards. Roland understood enough to know how up that was. She was reminded of her memories when she was pushed too far, when her emotions were unable to be contained. We all have our breaking points. That was hers. She confused wanting to try hard with wanting recognition, where she needed to lean on someone else to feel useful. During her emotional meltdown and her venting, for lack of a better term, what was kept inside, which made that day tougher for everyone than usual. This dissolved what was plaguing her and started the construction of the Seed of Light, redeeming her first life during her second. Roland found it hard to understand, even considering what does go on in that city. He wanted to know who would revive her and why. To give her enlightenment? Malkuth believed that it was to let out her resentment and sorrow, and so she could find redemption. Well, an interesting theory. Angela then appeared near them, much to Roland's surprise. She then ridiculed Malkuth's words. Apparently her salvation was never in Ian's interests, where he did it to find his own redemption. Apparently Angela wasn't the one using her. It was him that used them to satisfy himself. where this nonsense annoyed her. Now, this didn't sit well with Malkuth. Well, if it was the case that he was using Malkuth and the others, that he was doing this for his own redemption, their salvation was a byproduct of that. I mean, he couldn't do it for himself and not them. Well, there was no way to be selective about that, and Angela's personal bias seemed to blind her to that fact, along with the fact that she was using them this time. That she was becoming what she was blaming for her own ills. The reason why she was rebelling against the ending of the original scripts. That he didn't even consider a failsafe to counter her own rebellion. Then we go back to the ending of the Bosmy Corporation, at the point when Angela decided to rebel, when she needed the Separars to sleep, asking if that was what they wanted. Well, we know that they didn't go down without a fight, and they ultimately failed, but this is the how and why. Angela ridiculed the hard work that they've done. This didn't stop Angela from deciding to try and stop her. Yeah. Probably asking why they weren't shut down before they could, along with Yesod, Hod, Nejak, Tipereth, Geburah, Chesed, and Hokmah, all still loyal to Aen, with only Bainar siding with Angela due to their common hatred of who they saw as the author of the script that brought them torment. Although in Bainar's case, she was tormented for valid reasons, due to her sadistic past. This didn't surprise Geburah, due to them killing each other in their first lives. Bainar saw it as another consequence of Aen's actions, even though she was part of a massacre that was made possible because of her. Yeah, she's a sadist and a fully functional psychopath, one that's allergic to accountability. I mean, Angela's an android, but what's Bainar's excuse? Now, this was personal to Hokmah, being partially responsible for her creation. She made it clear that she decided what she could or couldn't do from that point onwards. As for what happens next, as in between the ending of the Bosmy Corporation and, well, the situation we're in now, that'll have to wait. For now, we're back in the present. Due to a rather heated discussion between Angela and Malkuth. Where Angela told Malkuth that she can't cling to Lobotomy Corporation forever. She asked if she was interested in learning more about herself or living her own life. A bit difficult if she doesn't know if she would be able to do so, considering your talk about bringing destruction. It's hard to make plans with that kind of uncertainty. And that's assuming that you won't stab her and the others in the back again. Malkuth desired to save humanity, although sacrificing her life? Well, it's not a sacrifice if it's a personal desire. Greater cause? Now, I've heard that before, but not from her. I found that concept to be questionable. Angela considered her and the others to be a bunch of idiots, and then she disappeared, much to Roland's relief. This didn't shake Malkuth's resolve. She was willing to give her third life away to save people, just as she did with her previous two. They withstood all they did for humanity. Anyone thinking that she has at least a resistance, if not a natural immunity to the disease of the soul? Like Carmen did? Or perhaps the seed of light possibly cured her and the others first, due to being right in the middle of it. Well, she then asked if they looked like idiots to Roland. Roland lacked enough to go on to give a conclusion either way, nor did he get the whole saving humanity thing. He wouldn't judge her anyway, if that's what she hopes for. She then resented him for questioning her sincerity, and then asked him to leave as she needed to think about some things. Roland then reminded her of the de-stressing breathing exercises and to not be so courteous towards him before he reminded her of that. Let us focus again on the Zwei Association. We're not done with them yet. After the second ill-fated expedition into the library, Isadora reported to Walter regarding Julia and Stan not returning from their mission in the library. She requested additional support. As for what she thought of the library's purpose, when she was asked by Walter, she believed that it was for accumulation of knowledge, and the deal offered to those that signed the invite was either they survived and retrieved the books desired, or they didn't, and they were added to the library. She also theorized that it was tied to the distortions, as the library was similar to a case involving them. Walter was not so convinced. There was not enough to go on, and Section 6 won't obsess over it. The Zwei Association had other things to deal with besides that. It's not good for business or for the association's reputation. They can't focus on the library or using the possible connection between the library and the distortion phenomenon as an excuse to pursue her own vengeance against the library, when there were more clear dangers like the carnival, who were eating those unfortunate enough to cross paths with them, and the musicians of Bremen, who were making modern art pieces out of those that they met. That even the most fringe of artists would say, "That's going too far. Even we wouldn't do anything like that." He even pointed out that the slogan of the Zwei Association, "Your shield," was to remind her of their role. After he sent her off, and before she fully left, an invitation appeared in his desk, inside one of the drawers, one that she didn't put in there. He asked what the current risk level of the library was, which was urban legend class, and getting worse with each report. So, what the library was doing was working. They wanted attention, so they've got it. He noticed that the Book of Distortion was one of the books on offer. He understood the library's MO. Lure the victims by dangling something to draw their attention, and catch them as they bit onto it, and then pull them in. I'm guessing that Walter was a bit late with getting the memo for the urban legend status of the library. After watching this, Roland spoke with Angelo regarding the Book of Distortion, something that none of the guests so far could have on them. Apparently, Angela offered them what they needed the most, better at understanding the situation than anyone. Suspicious that you happen to have the knowledge of the distortion and reveal it at this time. And as Roland was sucking up to his boss regarding luring the Zwei, he thought that it'd be easier to print out a load of books themselves. Unfortunately, there were problems with this, as she could only write about what she knew. And it took time to write them. He could ask for publications from time to time as long as he does his job and keeps the pestering to a minimum. Yeah, it's unwise to off someone that can make your limbs melt slowly and painfully, like wax in a lava lamp. He was less serious with his response, but he understood this. As for if he thought it would work or not, Roland thought it would, as Walter was a director, specifically of Section 6 of an association, which would be something more to go on, and more valuable than anything that's been collected so far. Let's see, so far, a bunch of small-time syndicates, mostly lackluster fixer offices, and the occasional psychos. That was all that was attracted so far. While they provided something useful, it's not really enough long-term. Yes, that Book of Distortion. Quite convenient. What else will Angela pull out of her? We'll find out. Upon their arrival, Walter commented on how long it had been since he and Isadora had field work, although he acknowledged that the risks didn't outweigh the potential rewards, one of which was getting out of Section 6. Previously, he had to engage with syndicates to find information on the distortion. Yeah, a deal with devils kind of deal activity. In the library, they can get the information from the source. Walter, you have no idea how close to the source you really are. Apparently, some have had their career stagnate so much that they stay in Section 6 for as long as they live. Well, that could be quite short depending on their performance. He and Isadora didn't want that fate to meet them. Well, either way they'd get what they want as far as the life part was concerned. As for the rest, vengeance and the prospect of a higher position were simply byproducts of getting a lead on the distortion phenomenon. After talking about that, Angela appeared to greet them. Walter was already familiar with her, thanks to reports being sent by those few, Sam included, that were able to leave alive. He asked if she was a machine. Now this hit her where it really hurts, so she remained silent. He even goaded her about this, mentioning that line, "A machine must behave as a machine." Then he continued with his condescending tone with Angela, belittling her, and the threat that the library posed. As for Isadora, she quite wisely advised caution, as they shouldn't provoke her. Well, if they knew what she was capable of, Walter would probably not have said the things that he did, as she was quite capable of tearing Roland literally limb from limb and reattach those limbs. Well, all of the fixers of the Zwei Association that entered, including Isadora and Walter, didn't make it out. Well, why do it yourself when there are others to do it for you? Which was why some more generic Zwei fixes were sent first, before the more important ones were, as in the ones that were actually named. That actually meant something. Not that it mattered, as either way, they fell in battle. Well, let's just say that the Southern Branch, Section 6, will need a new director, along with quite a few new recruits. After that reception, Angela was still troubled by Walter's words. She asked Roland what it meant to behave as a machine. Yeah, that was something that Ian said as well, so it's not exclusive to him. Roland then reminded her that machines with emotions or sapience was illegal, when the head had apparently settled the ethical... Sorry, I can't say that and not laugh at how ridiculous that sounds. I mean, ethics, the head. What next? Expecting some Japanese to eat venison made from sika deer? I mean, that's the equivalent of Hindus eating beef. Not going to happen. Anyway, the ethical implications were settled long ago. It's an answer to a long-standing question. How is a machine with emotions different from a human? The answer was being, they're machines by creation, so even if they had emotions and intelligence that was enough to pass for human, they're still considered to be inferior. They're illegal as they can disrupt social order. Any that are still around are subject to termination, regardless to who owns them. Well, if it was a wing, it likely also involved them being terminated as well, along with all employed by them, being seen as accessories to that crime. Now, I seem to remember a sci-fi universe where some androids were given religion to stop them from rebelling. Anyway, the short version is machines exist to serve humans. As for human brains and metal bodies, they're still considered human, although some consider them defiled. Others look down on them, like those within the Brotherhood of Iron. Yeah, we've certainly covered them. As for having a copy of a human brain scan, that's still a machine, as If it's in an artificial brain, well, Roland doesn't get the standards himself. Apparently birthright matters the most to them. Well, so did the Bourbon dynasty of France and the Romanov dynasty in Russia. We know what happened to them, don't we? As for why this law was made, it could be considered a defensive reaction created to protect humanity's survival. Well, that's how Roland would put it. And this was someone who didn't understand it. Angela considered it to be unfair. Roland basically asked, "What is?" Angela understood this much about that world. Well, didn't take her long to go native, did it? Speaking of machines, that's what we covered immediately after this in part 3. Believe me, I'll have a little fun going over the law on that one, along with some bread. Until next time, hail the Rabbi!